Hello, welcome to the Everything is Black and White podcast on Chronicle Live's Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Joined by our chief sports writer, Lee Ryder. Lee, another busy week covering Newcastle United. Plenty to talk about with regards to the takeover. But we'll start right now with Steve Bruce's press conference, which was earlier this morning ahead of the West Ham game up at St James's Park. What were the interesting points that the head coach had to say?
Yeah, well, obviously things were a lot more upbeat as compared to some of the press conferences that we've seen throughout this season, where they have been a bit fiery, and people have been in the firing line as things have got a little bit bitter. There's no two ways about it this season because of the pattern of results. But the most interesting point was probably the continued absence of Ryan Fraser. Where's he gone? 2 games for Scotland where he scores 2 goals and looks sensational, and a player that you would think that Newcastle could do within the team at the minute, and he's just nowhere to be seen. He's hasn't trained, and realistically, this move hasn't worked out for Ryan Fraser. So that was the big team news bit. Obviously, the debate over whether to start Alan St-Maximin and Callum Wilson is obviously going to be thriving. I've had a chat with a few people on Twitter about that today. What would you do? Would you start them, or would you bring them on as impact subs like you did against Burnley? But I think overall, Steve Bruce, as I say, in upbeat mood. The takeover was mentioned, but only in passing, really, and Steve Bruce just paying lip service to it, saying he doesn't know anything about it. He's oblivious to it all, and he's just getting on with the job and focusing on West Ham. But probably the one thing which I know me and you have already discussed this morning is the transfers, and it's Steve Bruce is the one who started the recruitment plans. So that suggests, as long as Mike Ashley's here, as long as Newcastle are in the Premier League, it will be Steve Bruce in charge of transfers in the summer. Although he did say there isn't going to be much money to spend, and I mean realistically, we both know that free transfers, loan deals, knockdown fees are going to be what he's dealing with. So that's where we stand this morning.
Did you sense a sense of frustration from Steve Bruce, not at Ryan Fraser, but at the situation Ryan Fraser finds himself in, with the fact he hasn't been able to play many games on a consistent basis this season?
Yeah, it's the second time he said it, actually, this comment that he hasn't really got up to speed. So what is that a sort of suggestion that the plan that they've got in place at Newcastle, he hasn't been able to do it? Is that where he's coming from with that? When he's played Ryan Fraser, he's been up and down, in my opinion. He has had some good games. He certainly talked a good game. He said when he come in, he was, he would have kept Bournemouth up on his own last season, that sort of thing. But then you have nights like the Sheffield United game where he got sent off, and that was pretty poor. It looked like a player that isn't settled, and yeah, the reaction from the bench that night as he walked off was there for all to see. So yeah, it's been really, really difficult for him so far. But I don't know. It just hasn't worked out, and unless he gets fit in the next couple of weeks, there's only going to be a few games left. So it seems like they're focused on getting St-Maximin fit, getting Wilson fit, and playing them together with Almiron, which was also something hinted at the press conference today.
You mentioned there Alan St-Maximin and Callum Wilson, and how you've asked fans on Twitter for their reaction. What would you do? Would you start them from the off tomorrow?
Well, that's the big question this weekend for me. I mean, he's going to be guided by his medical team, and they will give him a really good indication of exactly how long they can last on the pitch and what the dangers are. For me, if there was even any slight doubt that they were, going to be in trouble, then I wouldn't start them. I'd have them on the bench, and I would have them coming on as the impact subs. And if they can give me half an hour, then I'll take the half an hour rather than risk putting them in. And then the last thing we need to see now is one of them pulling up and coming off, clutching the hamstring or the groin or whatever. And with the 6 or 7 games left, you do not want that situation, given both players have already suffered enough this season. The sensible thing may well be just to start with them on the bench and see where they go.
We've got Tell Magpie Rossi asking, do you agree the only way tomorrow is to have an attacking formation? Would that be your approach against West Ham?
Well, yeah, I mean, for me, my personal preference would always be to go for the jugular. And, it's a lot easier defending a lead when you're 2 or 3-0 up. And, Newcastle seem to, it's almost like a game of chess sometimes, waiting to suss the opposition out. And it's dangerous. Look at the Burnley game. They went 1-0 down. If it wasn't for Dubravka, that game would have been finished before half time. It, could have been 2 or 3-0. And that would have been a total disaster. So, yeah, I mean, attack is always the best form of defense, isn't it? So let's hope that we let's see this balanced performance that we've been told about in recent weeks.
I mean, West Ham in the previous few games they've started really quickly. They scored 2 goals within 40 minutes against Leicester. I think they were 3-0 up the previous game. So they do tend to start games really quickly. And you mentioned there the Burnley start for Newcastle. Do you fear that if Newcastle start in the same manner, it was lackluster, they had to rely, like you see, on Martin Dubravka to keep the scores at 1-0. If they start in the same manner, West Ham, could have a field day.
Well, it could, but I mean, my observations of West Ham are that they are, and I know they've picked up a draw and 2 wins in the last 2 games, but I think that the nerve is starting to get to them. I do. I think the nerve's starting to fail them a little bit. The Arsenal game when they were 3-0 up and chucked it away, and then they squeezed through. They went 3-0 up at Wolves, and then they got pegged back and almost dropped points that night. The Leicester game was another example of that. It just reminds me a little bit of the 95-96 season with Newcastle when the nerves started to go within the dressing room. And I do think there'll be a lot of players in that West Ham dressing room who aren't used to being in this position at this stage of the season. So it's really the acid test for them in the next couple of weeks. Can they keep it up? I think they can jump up to 3rd spot if they win this weekend. So that's a big incentive for them. But I do think they are looking at very nervous. And I think if there was West Ham fans in the stadium, I think it would be a pressure cooker atmosphere at the minute. So, yeah, I think West Ham are looking nervous. They're looking wobbly, and Newcastle have got to take a massive, full advantage of that and try and get the win at the weekend.
Daniel Cooper asks, should we be worried about West Brom's late push? Obviously, they've won the last 2 games, scored quite a few goals. They are currently 8 points, or the 6 points, 8 points behind Newcastle. So should we be worried, Lee?
No, in short, no, because they've done fantastic, West Brom, in the last week. By the way, that point is looking even better that we got a few weeks ago down there now, but that's another matter. I think they've done brilliant, West Brom, but I think they've given themselves too much to do in a short space of time. They would need title-winning form now in the last 7 games to stay up. So for me, not really. I'm not too worried about them. I think 8 points is a massive gap at this stage of the season. You've got to lose 3, they've got to win 3 just to even get sort of in and around it again. So no, I think Newcastle will not be overtaken by West Brom. The fact they took 4 points from 6 against West Brom has been a massive factor in all this.
You say there was kind of hints from Steve Bruce that he's planning for next season. Do you think he's under the impression that Newcastle are pretty much safe, and it maybe is just, I don't know, another win and a draw would secure it?
Well, if you go back to what he said around this stage of the season last year, in terms of games played, because obviously the pandemic messed everything up, so we weren't even playing games at this point last year. But you go back to sort of 31, 32 game mark, he said that he thought 35 points, no one would catch them on that. So maybe that's in his head again. If Newcastle win against West Ham, they'd be on 35 points. And if Fulham lose, then you would say, again, it's a mountain to climb for them. So, yeah, I personally think, he does think they're very near to being safe. and after that, it'll be how many points can they pick up or accumulate, as he keeps telling us. And yeah, realistically, I think if they can get anywhere near what they got last season, which was 44 points, then given what we've been through this season, that is not a bad situation. It's not great. I'm not bigging it up too much, but I think that would be a very reasonable situation given where we were that night after Brighton, because that was horrendous. So let's remember where we've come from in a short space of time.
Paul Oxley asking, do you think a point would be a good result tomorrow? He had Newcastle down for 4 points against Burnley and West Ham.
Yeah, it wouldn't be the worst result around. It would be another point on the board. I'm sure Steve Bruce would take it if you offered him beforehand. But realistically, let's get this thing sealed off and let's get a win. That's where my mentality is at the minute.
Brilliant stuff. Well, if you guys head over to our podcast channel, you can see you can hear the match day preview with Tom Clark from Football London and our very own John Gibson. Stick with us here, though. We're going to talk about the busy week off the field, and we'll go in order of the stories, Lee. We'll start with the club shop and what's happening there. It's closing down. Can you just explain to our viewers and listeners your understanding of ongoings there?
Yeah, I think there's a bit of confusion around with that one. We are told that the staff got a letter which said that new owners didn't want the shop. So that's where the sort of takeover element of it comes from. Now, whether the communication hasn't been put through properly, we don't know. But people at the club are saying it's nothing to do with the takeover. It's the fact that the shop is getting taken over by the new kit sponsors who are going to be coming in, and that there's going to be an announcement on that soon. And they're going to be looking after the shop. The shop are actually, it's called a club shop, but it's not the club's shop, if you like, because it's Sports Direct and Fraser's Group have been running that job. So what I'm told is the staff have been put on redundancy sort of notice, but at the moment they don't know if they're going to have a job in the new setup. So they could end up just getting sort of transferred to the new kit sponsors and working for them. We'll have to wait and see what happens on that. But that's where we are with it. It is a deal that the current regime have negotiated. It's got nothing to do with the would-be owners. So yeah, it's while we all would love a rumor that there's a big signifier that this takeover is in the pipeline. Sadly, this isn't it, and it's just a letter which sounds like it hasn't been put together too well, and there's a bit of a lack of communication between club and Sports Direct.
Then on Wednesday, there was the story that I broke on the FOIs from the Department for Culture, Media and Sport. For those who haven't seen it, basically a chain of emails between April and June between the DCMS and the Premier League. And on the 21st of June, the Premier League confirmed a decision on the Newcastle United takeover is possible on June the 22nd. And this follows weeks of emails by the DCMS who are stating sources who believe a decision was imminent. Nothing came of it, Lee. But the DCMS had organised high-level meetings to deal with whatever the outcome was. These were very, the people in these meetings were going to be at least deputy director level. So that shows you the level of government that is dealing with this decision. And from my point of view, it kind of shows you how wide-ranging this deal would be. And in a way, the consortium's confidence has been vindicated in a way, not in terms of getting the deal through, but in terms of a decision coming. They did think a decision was coming in those weeks and days. What did you make of it?
Well, if anything, it just backs up what was written all throughout last year. And while we were writing stories, breaking stories, saying that this takeover was all in place and waiting to happen, there was a lot of people doubting it. saying, "Oh, it's the Takeover, it's try and renew season tickets, this, that, and the other." And really, all it does is back up what has already been said. And for Mike Ashley, he wants to sell the club. I wrote, I think, a couple of weeks ago, his personal take on it is that Newcastle fans have won the lottery, but they're not seeing the payout. There you have it. It's now down to whether this will be pushed through or not. And what you have to worry about a little bit there is that the Premier League weren't keen on this for some reason. The government have tried to intervene, from what we're reading in national newspapers, and realistically now it's down to whether the Premier League will push this through. The one thing that does sort of not worry me, but I just think that if the Premier League get told you should have put it through, do they then turn around and bring the piracy argument back into it? That's and put a big bill down on the table for the incoming owners to deal with, and that's where it could get messy. So I think the Premier League stood back from this in recent weeks because Newcastle obviously were in relegation trouble. Now that doesn't look to be the case. It means that they're going to have to deal with it at some point, not the AFL. I think they were possibly hoping that Newcastle did. I wouldn't say hoping they get relegated, but hoping that it wasn't their problem anymore. And the AFL would have to make that decision. So we'll have to wait and see where they go with it. We've tried to speak the Premier League in this week. No comment as per normal. So it's one that just continues to rumble on.
There was a line in those emails that the Premier League said there were new territory with this deal. Does that, to you, suggest that? Well, I interpret that as maybe them admitting that their owners and directors test isn't really fit for purpose, because how can you be in new territory? It's just really the test is there to put through a takeover, yes or no. So I'm just wondering what you make of that, them being in new territory with this deal.
Well, I think there's been stories sort of already that this test needs to be changed a little bit and it needs to be tweaked, and that's something that this whole situation might end up, bringing about. So for Newcastle fans, it's no consolation though, because it just drags on and on and on. And I've had a lot of tweets from people saying they're sick of it, they're bored of it, and they're not happy with all these takeover stories. But it simply can't be ignored. It's not, it's not just the local press. It's front page national news at the moment. So, it can't be ignored. It's a big story, and one that we'd all dearly love some kind of conclusion to, because just been left dangling, which I think was one of the things that sort of was mentioned this week. And you hope Newcastle can get it sorted, and then we can move on to bigger and better.
What did you make of the story on the Crown Prince and the accusation of lobbying Boris Johnson, and him getting one of his ministers to look into it? What did you make of that story?
Well, it's quite messy, really, because obviously separation is what sparked this whole problem. The Premier League were worried that it was a state-led takeover, when the bidding side were arguing it was a PIF-led situation. So that, for me, is one where we just have to wait and see how it pans out, really. And ultimately, you've got to look at other, again, I think I spoke to you about this earlier in the week, you've got to look at other takeovers at other clubs and compare and contrast. And Newcastle can hopefully get this one through, then the big final outcome, what if it's worth being patient about, is that big boost for the football club would put them right up there with the top six again. But not just that, big boost for the region, where it's money coming in from the Middle East. There's already tourism with back and forwards with the Middle East, at Newcastle Airport with Emirates. Now this would be something completely different. We've seen tourism adverts on Sky Sports in between Premier League games about tourism in Saudi Arabia. So it could be just one big game changer for the Premier League, for Newcastle United and the rivals, which obviously there's been a lot of debate about the top six being against it, because it would ultimately be it cost them dear potentially.
Certainly be interesting to know the definite line of the arbitration and what is actually trying to be proved or argued, because I think, you mentioned the separation issue there, and I do look at it and think, when you look at all the facts, it is a little bit, in my opinion, difficult to prove that they are totally separate. The Crown Prince is at the top of the pyramid chain on the PIF's website, so it'll be interesting to know how that plays into the whole arbitration battle, and I'm sure we'll find out in the coming weeks and months. You mentioned early the Premier League. I tried to get in touch with them. You did yesterday as well. No comments, as we always tend to expect from the Premier League. How frustrated does that make you? Because we're going to the Premier League with stories from contact sources, what have you, and they're just coming back with the same answer. No comments. We won't comment. Surely they owe. And I know there'll be confidentiality with the arbitration, what have you, but they do owe the fans an explanation.
Well, they do, and it's one of them where I think my take on it is that the Premier League may look at the local media as sort of at the bottom of the food chain, and that the huge audience we have doesn't seem to matter. And it's only when Richard Masters sort of gets his shirt and tie on and sits down in front of the bigger corporations that we all have to stand up and pay attention, and where we just continually are getting no comment. But we've got to still keep asking the questions. That's part of our job. We have to keep putting things to them, and hopefully, they can see a bit of reason, because at the end of the day, it's a huge fan base for Newcastle United, and it's within the interest of all the other Premier League clubs as well. So, I mean, the one thing that they will probably put in front of us at the minute is that this arbitration thing is ongoing. So until that gets resolved, then they probably will feel they can't say anything too deeply.
I would just like a conclusion now. Either way, I mean, of course, we'd all love Newcastle to be taken over by ambitious owners with pockets full of money and turning Newcastle into a Premier League winner, champion. But I think ourselves as journalists, fans, we've all been through it the past year, and it's not good for anybody to keep going through it. And you can kind of understand some of the comments, and I would just like a conclusion either way now. Just let's get it sorted and we can move on one way or the other. I don't know how you're feeling.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's one where the current state of Newcastle United is, and this is part of the frustration, I think, with Steve Bruce, and he thinks that he's doing a reasonable job to keep Newcastle afloat in the Premier League. That was his brief, and the historic sort of thing that keeps getting chucked back at him is that Newcastle have got more potential than being a team that stays against relegation. But in terms of resources and the money that's realistically been put in, and yeah, they have spent a few quid on transfers, there's no doubt about that. But I think he thinks that Newcastle are competing with teams like Burnley, Crystal Palace, West Brom at the bottom there, Fulham to an extent. He thinks that Newcastle are in a bit of a sort of mini league in terms of just staving off survival, and the whole history thing comes into it. And Newcastle fans know that the potential of the club is greater. So that in some ways that's not 100% his fault. He's got to take some responsibility as manager of the team. But ultimately, it's about how much money is put in from the top. Then you've got Mike Ashley's side of the argument, where he'll say, "Well, hold on, I broke your transfer record. I gave you 40 million for Joe Linton. We signed Callum Wilson last summer. We've signed St. Maximin, and I've put money in there, and it's not up to me to go and get the results." So it's there's more questions than answers in some ways.
Yeah, I think that's been kind of the the underlying conclusion of this week is that all this stuff has come out, but we still got more questions than we have answers. Penultimate question there from Callum McGill and Lee. Just wants to ask you, do you reckon nothing will get decided until Newcastle are safe?
Well, to be totally honest, I got told by somebody close to the deal that they were anticipating nothing to get sort of done and dusted until the end of the season at the very earliest, possibly going into summer. And did the application to get the chairman of the panel for arbitration removed, has that cost Newcastle vital weeks and months? Has it put it back a little bit? That is a big possibility. Steve Bruce is already talking about being in charge at the start of next season, so that's July time we're talking. So yeah, it's I don't think it hinges on Newcastle being safe. I think it's a time thing, and Newcastle will have to just go through the process. You can't. It's not a touch of the button thing, unfortunately. The world we're living in now, where people think you can do everything at the touch of a button on your phone. Can't be done. It's got to go through the rigors of the courtroom, and people have got to put their arguments forward. And then obviously the COVID thing has held it. The whole restrictions, that's held everything up. So it's extremely difficult, and one where we just have to wait. That's all we can do, wait and hope.
Yeah, that is what we've been doing. Like Lee says, it's probably what we're going to have to do for the next couple of months at the very least. Just before I get your score prediction then, Lee, I just want your word on the 1892 pledge from the Newcastle United Supporters Trust. Well over 50,000 pledge so far. For you guys who haven't heard about it or haven't read about it, it's the Newcastle United Supporters Trust. They've launched a scheme in which fans are asked to pledge what they can afford every month in the hope that one day they can buy a part of Newcastle United. Like we say, well over £50,000 raised. It's just over a week old. Great start. Just your take on it, Lee?
Yeah, it's one of them where we've been here before with it. I think they tried something in 2009. I think it was Mark Jensen and Steve Hasty were the guys that were spearheading it back then. And it sort of petered away a little bit. So but from what we can see so far, it looks like a really good start. Good luck to everyone involved. Hope they can eventually get some space in the boardroom. We've had supporters panels before where they've been invited in, but we haven't had that for a while. So we'll have to wait and see. Look, it's a bigger thing. It's a long-term project. This one, it's something that isn't just about getting into board meetings. It's something that I'm sure the guys have gave all the questions and answers on it. So there's not really much more I can add to it apart from good luck and 50 grand in the pocket already. Fantastic. Hopefully you can build on that. And the good thing is that what the standout thing for me is that it shows that people still deeply care about this club, and that in the event that you do follow Sunderland down the leagues, which hopefully isn't going to happen, that there will be some money there from a fan group who've got the club at heart to come in. I hope it doesn't go to that, but it's been a whirlwind start for them, and hopefully they can continue to gain more pledges.
Fingers crossed. You can find the official launch event on our YouTube channel and our podcast channel. Just search the 1892 pledge and you can hear all the questions and answers put to the likes of Alex Hurst, who's leading it, Warren Barton, George Colkin, who are the guardians who will look after the money. Really good chat there and gives you a bit of insight into what they're trying to do. Just finally then, Lee, your score prediction for Saturday?
Well, we've been doing a lot of predictions for draws in recent weeks, and to be fair, I haven't been far away. But hopefully, I've got a good feeling about this game. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but as I say, I do think West Ham are wobbling a little bit, and I think this is a big test for them coming up here I think the realization of the situation they're in will be there for all to see from a West Ham point of view when they're driving up to such a huge ground. Although it's going to be empty, I think it's going to be a real test for them. And I think Newcastle can really benefit from their nerves, and I think they're going to get a good result. I think they're going to win. What the score will be is, if you look at West Ham's last few games, they've been 5 and 6 goal thrillers. Are we going to see something a little bit like the Southampton game where Newcastle win by the odd game of 5? I don't know. I'll try and keep it real and say that Newcastle get a 2-1 win, which I'm sure would be a great result for everybody.
It would be brilliant, wouldn't it? 3 points against a high-flying West Ham side. Well, they'll be at St James Park tomorrow. Kickoff is an early one. Is it 12? 12:30? They're all rolling into one.
Yeah, it's a lunchtime kickoff. So obviously our coverage will be up there from just after breakfast time, and hopefully Newcastle can deliver, and let's put this whole thing to bed. Let's get safe and then start building up towards the points tally that could get somewhere near what they got last season. As I say, not brilliant, but it's better than where we were after the Brighton game. Let's be totally honest.
Better than relegation, isn't it? You can head over to chroniclelive.co.uk where you can catch up with all Lee's stuff from today's press conference and everything else Takeover related. And as Lee says, our coverage will start bright and early tomorrow morning through our live blog. In the meantime, enjoy the rest of your Friday.